All right, guys. We don't want to keep this too long, so I'm going to get started. We have a very important, very special closing community meeting for 2025. We've been on a very, very long journey, and we are coming now to its culmination. We are reaching the peak of the mountain. So, what we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about the launch of the Sovryn layer, the conversion of SOV to canonical SOV, the distribution of BOSS, and I'm going to lay out the roadmap that we have for this very, very significant transition. Um, I apologize if I cough or am a bit slow. I unfortunately have the flu today, but because this was such, we were considering postponing the meeting, but because this is such an important and timely meeting, we've decided that we would go ahead anyway. So I'm very excited to be able to present to you guys today. For those of you who do not know, um, I published the probably most significant SIP I have written to the forum, um, to the Sovryn forum for community review yesterday. Already we started to get some great comments, and we will allow opportunity for discussion. But our goal is to begin the deployment of the Sovryn layer starting early next year, and complete this arc, this journey that we've been on, which I would call phase one of Sovryn, and open us up to the next phase in Sovryn's journey, which is finally being able to offer everything that the black paper promised, and everything that we set ourselves as a community a mission to develop. So I'm going to start with a brief recap and of how we got here, and then discuss what the roadmap is, and then open the conversation up to questions. So please, if you have any questions that come to your mind during this presentation, please feel free to write them down or recall them, and then we will attempt to address as many questions as possible. Before I get into that, as many of you are aware, there has been a significant restructuring of Sovryn for us to achieve this mission. Can we go on to the next slide, please? Part of that restructuring has also been a restructuring of the team. As we move into the phase where we deploy the Sovryn layer, deploy SOV, and allow for the transition of SOV to canonically exist on BOSS, and start to see the first Sovryn layer become the first true rollup to Bitcoin, and BOSS begin to offer the technology for that, for Bitcoin rollups and for interoperability between other systems with reduced trust assumptions and without the need for centralized bridges. Sovryn is going to become much more infrastructure oriented, and so we have to restructure our thinking and the team around that. And so part of the team have completed their effort on the team, and are, while they remain part of the Sovryn community, a significant part of the team, particularly on the application side, things like the community managers, and some of the UI team, have left the team. And I want to say a huge thank you to all of the people who have been on the team, have brought us this far. A huge thank you to the community who have been part of this journey, but in particular, a huge thank you to all of the people who have been with the team and are not with the team today. Um, all remarkable individuals, almost all of them joined as community members first, and then began to increase their contribution as formal team members, um, and a fantastic group of people. It has been an absolute pleasure and honor to work with and frankly, a humbling experience to work with these people who have been as mission oriented and as sovereign as one could um, imagine. And I think we've created something really, really phenomenal with Sovryn, a truly mission driven project. And I think that is reflected in the kind of people that are engaged and have been engaged. And so for many of us, people on the team and for people in the community, there are people who we've come to trust and come to know who are no longer officially part of the team. But I want to make clear that does not mean that they are no longer part of the community. And more importantly, I want to make clear that I think everyone appreciates the massive effort that they have made, and we are. I started this. The first slide here as this is a major metamorphosis. We are, as Sovryn, changing. It's an extremely exciting change, and so it's going to restructure the team, the way we think, and the way we operate. And with that, I'd like to apologies. I'll try to mute the next time I do that. And so with that, I'd like to go on to the next slide and give a quick recap of how we got here. Next slide, please. So we have taken on a massive challenge, something that not everyone, but more and more people have been talking about for years. And the drumbeat for building a truly performant BTC, for building a platform on Bitcoin, for building a world on Bitcoin, that vision of DeFi, of privacy, of scalability has become now more of a consensus view of Bitcoin. But almost 6 years ago, when we started Sovryn, that was an extremely counterintuitive, contrarian view. And it was a huge undertaking. To get there, what we did is we launched the first effective proof of concept DeFi platform on Rootstock. We grew that into a ecosystem of applications, of dApps, including trading, lending, Bitcoin-backed stablecoins, Launchpad, and more. And we pioneered the world of Bitcoin DeFi. It became apparent that we would also need to significantly change the infrastructure on which we were building. And so we incubated Boss. And over the last year and a half, we have been incubating Boss. Boss is now launched and is starting to see integrations of multiple other third parties. And we said that Sovryn would launch the Sovryn layer, finally having a platform which we own, which we control, which reflects our vision, and upon which and to which we would be able to deploy the dApps that we've built and future dApps, and create an opportunity for an ecosystem to grow of Bitcoin DeFi secured directly by Bitcoin and with BTC available cryptographically in the system rather than through centralized bridges. And we are now, as we enter 2026, after having spent 5 years building the different components and putting together the different components of this vision, proving out the different components of this vision, building out the consensus, what has become the consensus view, right? So effectively persuading the world to come to our vision. We're now reaching the zenith, where we will be building out a full stack financial operating system on Bitcoin. This will be the sovereign layer. It will be launching on this project that we incubated, BitcoinOS, and will offer for the first time true Bitcoin native rollup with trustless composability via ZK proofs, near L1 security with almost no additional trust assumptions, and the ability for sovereign autocracy, sovereign governance, to govern dApps across the BOSS ecosystem as they get deployed and as Sovryn grows. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Now, to get there, we have two primary things that we need to do. And I want to emphasize, these transitions are never, these transitions are extremely complicated. We've seen and studied a number of other transitions that have been attempted by projects that have looked to move from the application layer into the infrastructure layer, or shift between different versions of infrastructure. Almost always, these have proven to be long, complicated, drawn-out processes. So we've spent a lot of time thinking about how we could bundle everything together to avoid the pitfalls that others have, discovered for us by walking through that minefield before us. Be able to do it more efficiently, more cheaply, and most importantly, securely and faster. So we've got two components, and I'm gonna the SIP lays out in greater detail what I'll be discussing now, but there are two primary components here. One, we need to launch Sovryn Layer as the canonical home. It needs to be EVM compatible because that is what we've built, but it will become a home for our dApps, and most importantly, for our Bitocracy. The second component is SOV. We have to make sure that we're not increasing the amount of SOV because of a transition. We have to make a transition which is not going to incentivize a breakdown in the governance or in the use of the rootstock dApp. And if there is a transition of activity from rootstock to sovereign layer, we want that transition to occur in a smooth process. And so we are going to be introducing SOV in a process which will allow our users, our community, all of us to transition our SOV to the sovereign layer. And importantly, SOV will now take on two important new features. The first is that SOV will become the asset which earns the transaction fees for the sovereign layer. So as transactions are occurring on the sovereign layer, that the gas fees paid to do that will represent a new and perhaps the most important, eventually the most important form of revenue for Sovryn. The second thing is that SOV will be deployed to be a Bitcoin native asset so that it can be secured by Bitcoin, so that it can be utilized within the BitcoinOS ecosystem, so it can be transferred to bridgelessly to other assets, to other pieces of infrastructure like chains, and to future-proof it. So SOV is going to get two important new features. So I'm going to start by talking about the deployment of the sovereign layer. The way we will be, and then I will talk about SOV. So the way we will be deploying the sovereign layer is we will first deploy the sovereign layer as a testnet It will be integrated with zkBTC and Boss, and we will deploy core apps, staking, um, lending, trading on the Sovryn layer, as well as invite third-party dApps for the first time also to deploy on that testnet. We will then transition to the Sovryn layer mainnet, and as we do that, in order to allow for a smooth transition of SOV, a few things will happen. One, Sovryn layer SOV will become the canonical SOV, and we will be looking to transition CoinGecko, CoinMarketCap, and other systems that monitor SOV to monitor SOV via that platform. Second, holders of SOV will be able to transition rootstock SOV over, and other forms of SOV, but primarily rootstock SOV, over to the Sovryn layer via a burn and mint process. In other words, you will have a one-way process where you can transition your SOV over to the Sovryn layer. And most importantly, there is the SOV in the Bitocracy. Now, as you guys know, Bitocracy is a unique system which incentivizes people to stake for an extended period of time, and therefore there are significant amounts of SOV locked in that system. So we have considered a number of different ways of dealing with the challenge of transitioning SOV over to the Sovryn layer without disrupting governance and Bitocracy on rootstock. I won't go into all of the different ways that we have considered. I will sort of cut to the chase. What I propose in the SIP is that what we will do is on a one-to-one basis, everyone who holds SOV staked will immediately get SOV staked, as well as the additional earned SOV that they've been accruing via staking on Sovryn layer as we make the transition. At the same time, SOV that exists in rootstock Bitocracy will continue to remain there, and you will be able to continue to vote with that SOV, but that SOV will be removed from the circulating supply of SOV and locked in Bitocracy forever, or until such time as rootstock Bitocracy is wound down and taken over by Sovryn Bitocracy. So you continue to have governance rights over rootstock, but you will have access to a more streamlined version of SOV, and in many ways you'll have greater access to your SOV, and you will have an automated process of getting that SOV on the Sovryn layer. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, supporting all of this is BitcoinOS. Boss is the project that we have been incubating now for a year and a half. There are other rollups which will be launching, as well as other chains such as Cardano and Litecoin, which are going to be integrating. Our goal here is to have Sovryn be in a position, should we decide, to be able to offer either people on those rollups and chains to utilize trustlessly the applications that are built on Sovryn layer, or to deploy other systems, to deploy dApps to those systems directly, but that are governable via Bitocracy. Bus will allow us to do that. Furthermore, Bus will, for the first time, allow us to have zkBTC, so BTC with one of n security assumptions, no centralized or even federated bridges required, and the opportunity for us to build additional scalability and privacy into our Bitcoin transactions, as well as be able to offer um, our sovereign layer applications as the first point of call for building out the Bitcoin OS ecosystem. So we are going to be looking to build BOSS as the primary center for token launches, token issuance, token trading, token borrowing, and lending for all tokens in the Bitcoin OS ecosystem, and in particular those that are being introduced and issued. These native applications, Bitcoin native applications, do not currently exist and may not exist for a significant period of time. And so Sovryn layer is going to be able to act as a hub for the entire BOSS ecosystem as it is built out. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, now, canonical SOV. I want to talk briefly around the nomenclature here, right? The names. We're canonical SOV, although we refer to it usually as CSOV, will be SOV. That will be SOV. SOV will exist for a period across rootstock and sovereign layer, but our goal via the burn and mint process is to allow a transition of SOV to the sovereign layer, and for SOV to be created, even though it's available in the sovereign layer. In practice, SOV will become a charm, an asset which exists first and foremost on the as a programmable token on the Bitcoin network itself. And so we will not be making a change to SOV supply. And everyone who owns SOV today, and more accurately, anyone who owns SOV on the day that we introduce canonical SOV and shift to canonical SOV will continue to own SOV on the sovereign layer as they transition. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Now, here is an important element that we are introducing as part of this comprehensive plan. And I think this might be the most controversial aspect of what we're looking to do, but I think a very, very important aspect of what we're looking to do. So we introduced Bitocracy 5 years ago as a governance system which was designed to allow for decentralization and to be able to protect from governance attacks better than any other system. An additional design goal of Bitocracy was to provide incentives for long-term thinking and long-term commitment to the system. I think in terms of that design criteria, Bitocracy has remained unequal. Even after all of these years, there is no system which provides the same level of long-term incentives, protection from governance attacks, decentralization, and overall provides for rational governance as Bitocracy. However, we have noted a challenge, and this has been a challenge which we noticed many years ago and has remained a challenge. And that challenge is the incongruence between when people stake and how long they need to stake for, right, which is a smooth and long-term process, and how revenue comes in, which is a bumpy, highly variable, and hard to predict process. And so Sovryn has been a profitable protocol generating revenue from the beginning. On average, and we published this quite recently, the Sovryn protocol has been distributing to SOV stakers on the order of $750 million annualized. However, what we've seen is that this hasn't translated into additional demand sufficient to be reflected in the SOV price, and we can see that by the fact that that almost always the cost of staking, in other words, the amount the protocol needs to pay people to stake, is extremely high, often 80% APY annualized. That is ridiculously high. It is irrationally high. And the reason for this is people have to stake today. Um, they have to stake for a long time. But if a reward uh, um, comes, in 2 years, then people who start staking only in 2 years will also benefit in the same way. And so you could start staking now, right? But someone who comes and stakes after you could benefit the same or more, um, even though they begin to stake later. And so the reality is, this created a a a situation where the incentives to stake today were reduced, and frustration for people who have been staking. We have partially ameliorated that by beginning with SIP, I think it was SIP 71, to begin to provide additional incentives in SOV. So if you are staking early, if you start staking, like I'm staking today, and uh, Adam is only going to start staking in 2 years, I have 2 years of additional SOV accrual to me, which I can actually restake. And so I will get in 2 years' time more than Adam, who only starts staking in 2 years. Our goal with Sovryn Layer is to do two things. One, add additional revenue streams in the form of additional dApps, but perhaps most importantly in the form of the transaction fees, which right now we're paying to Rootstock, and we will now be able to internalize. And second, to create, to learn from other projects and to learn from what has been successful, and to continue to be able to provide stronger incentives for people to stake today, so that they can benefit more from than someone who stakes in 2 years. What we've seen is that projects that have been hyper successful, like Hyperliquid, MakerDAO, BNB, Injective, have shifted towards utilizing buy and burn. Buy and burn means that the protocol accumulates revenue, and then that revenue is utilized to buy and burn the token. This creates a constant buyback, a constant buy pressure for the token, which translates into value today and also speculative value tomorrow, connects the value of the token to both the revenue today and the potential revenue tomorrow in a far more direct way, and allows for us to begin to provide rewards today to people, even though the revenue may only be in 2 or 3 or 4 years. And so, as part of this transition, I am proposing that we shift to a buy and burn methodology, and I have a high degree of conviction around this. I think it is going to be an absolute game changer for Bitocracy, for Sovryn, for SOV's ability to accrue value, and for the ability of individual stakers to accrue value based on the length of their stake, not just going forward, but also going backwards. In other words, staking today will always be better than staking tomorrow. Can we go to the next slide, please? All right. So one problem that we've also encountered by talking about Sovryn Layer and having rootstock and the Bob deployment, and also our general reticence around deployments across other platforms, which we chose not to deploy because it fragments the system, fragments governance, creates dependencies and bridges. This fragmentation problem is also being dealt with by our introduction of the sovereign layer and the way in which we're doing it. And it allows us to create a pretty simple heuristic where we will now have the ability to unify and to have a much freer hand in deploying instances across the Boss ecosystem while maintaining a unified token, a unified governance, and a unified community, as opposed to the fragmentation that we would have experienced up until now. Can we go to the next slide, please? And so the goal of sovereign bitocracy is to be a single bitocracy which will govern everything that Sovryn does. And we are going to have to deal with two legacy systems, Bob and Rootstock. Rootstock, we, on a temporary basis, will continue to run the governance as is, but with the inability to withdraw that SOV and effectively removing that SOV from the total SOV supply. And Bob, we already have a methodology via the exchequer of bridging governance, which we will continue, but we can, and I think should, consider closing the depths on Bob and shifting our focus to being the sovereign layer and the broader Boss ecosystem. Next slide, please. Okay, now a third component here is leading us up to this point was the incubation of Boss. And with that, a 10% distribution of the Boss token, of the total Boss token, 10% is to go to Sovryn. There has been debate about how much should go to exchequer, how much should go to stakers, and how this will be distributed. The SIP provides clarity on this, where what I am proposing is the entire 10% be distributed to stakers. Stakers who are staking today will have the ability to earn SOV to stake an even greater proportion in order to begin to earn Boss that will be distributed to stakers, which will start in October of 2026. That Boss will be distributed in a linear fashion over 3 years to Boss stakers, which is in line with strategic investors or VC investors in Boss. And the full amount will be distributed to the stakers on the sovereign layer. Now, critically, everything in the shift to buy and burn, the goal is to distribute SOV to stakers, and then contrary-wise burn SOV from protocol revenue, so that the value is accrued via SOV, which reduces the degree to which people are staking in one asset and therefore taking price risk in that asset and earning in another asset. Boss will be the exception to this. With Boss, because we want to be able to directly reward this Boss to stakers, it will not be utilized as part of the buy and burn program for SOV, but will be distributed directly to the stakers. Can we move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so here's the roadmap. I won't go too much into detail. There's more detail about this in the SIP. But effectively, what we need to do now is we will have a debate and discussion around the SIP. If there are modifications that need to be made to the SIP, we will make them. We will then look to have governance approval, so Bitocracy to approve the SIP, and any ancillary technical SIPs that need to be written in order to execute it. We will then begin the preparatory phase of building out the systems required for the mint and burn, required for the deployment of the sovereign layer and the distribution and the introduction of staking on sovereign layer, as well as dApps on sovereign layer, launch the testnet, launch the mainnet, begin the migration, and then by the end of the year, the migration will be, we expect, well completed, and the bus distribution will begin. This entire story is effectively told in the SIP, and we expect this to begin immediately with the approval of the SIP, which I hope we will be able to do very early next year. So assuming there is not too much controversy around the SIP, we're basically in position now to begin immediately. Can we move on to the next slide? All right, so to summarize, SOV will govern Sovryn, earn from the dApps, earn from the infrastructure, and Sovryn is becoming more of an infrastructure player. Sovereign layer will be the infrastructure for Bitocracy, and that Bitocracy is effectively Sovryn. And we are going to be a core component of growing and being a central player in the BitcoinOS ecosystem, where our goal is to be able to significantly expand our reach by opening up our dApps, opening up the products that we've built to a much wider audience, and an audience which doesn't currently have, where we can be a first mover in the same way that we were first mover and the dominant mover in rootstock. Final slide, please. I think that's it. No, we've got... All right. Thank you very much. We now have 20 minutes left, and what I would like to try and do is answer any questions or any comments that you guys might have. Okay, if you have questions, you can type them into the community call text box, which you can find. It's the little comic speak icon in the upper right corner. So Dave is asking what dApps. Initially, our intention is to transition the core dApps. So that is to say, trading, lending, and most likely the launchpad, as well as potentially Zero, so that we can provide Bitcoin-backed stablecoins. However, we are examining whether or not there are changes that need to be introduced to Zero before we do that. I also know that there are people in the audience listening to us now who have their own plans on how to improve. As for perpetuals, which is what Rafit is asking, our current plan is not to develop perpetuals ourselves, but we are talking to a number of projects who are interested in deploying perpetuals. Why would we do that? For two reasons. First of all, there is a limited, there is a significant cost in terms of focus and maintenance required for every single application that we launch. That was one of the lessons that we have learned over the last few years. So how can we, but up until now, unless we deployed something, we could not earn from it. However, now, by building out an ecosystem of third-party developers and third-party applications, because we will earn from the gas fees and from the TVL that comes to Sovereign Layer, it is to our benefit to have multiple parties deploying all kinds of dApps, and that will include perps, margin trading, etc. Sorry, guys, I just see that other people are typing, so I'm waiting to see their questions and then be able to respond. I've also invited Hyde to join us here
Yeah,
so that he can help.
yeah. Hi guys, hi Iago. If someone has some questions, can also join the stage. Just raise your hand and ask your questions directly.
So Brianna says, and I will read out what she says: restaking, SOV price, and buybacks. That later staking party misses out on compound growth for 2 years. Um, yes and no, Brianna, but I appreciate what you're saying. So SOV revenues have consistently grown 20% year over year since 2022. Yes, we have seen growing revenue. SOV's irrationally low prices due to the long-term bear market psychology from being significantly overvalued from 2021, crypto frenzy. Most stakers for years have learned to sell their SOV for RBTC in order to hold staking value. Sovryn's own debt talks about the returns displayed are only if all protocol fees are immediately converted to RBTC. This is correct. We denominate everything in RBTC. This psychology needs time to reverse. The price is absolutely low enough for this to occur. It will just take time and for people to see a flaw occur. I love everything that you've shared, but would support tabling the idea of using protocol fees for buybacks. So I'd like to respond. First of all, I think this is a crucial component. We will struggle to make any changes to Bitocracy once deployed. So if we don't make the change now, making the change in the future will be much more difficult. But beyond that, I actually think that what you're writing, Brianna, is exactly what we're trying to deal with. Today, people earn SOV and convert it to RBTC immediately, as you say. Now, what the buybacks does is it reverses the directionality of that flow. The protocol will earn fees instead of these fees being distributed to stakers uh, who, when they are in the form of SOV, immediately convert them to RBTC. All of those revenues in the form of BTC and other assets will be used to buy SOV, pull it from the market, and burn it. In other words, if today people are taking SOV and selling it for other assets, what we're going to be doing is reversing that flow and taking other assets and using them to buy SOV. And I think that that is going to have a much more direct and ultimately rational impact on how SOV is valued. Rafita asks, what wallets are going to be used by Sovereign Layer? Effectively, any EVM wallet will be viable, and we would expect the same set of wallets that are currently being utilized and can be utilized with Sovereign to continue to be utilized.
Iago, let me maybe add some other couple of other thoughts on staking and governance. So this is also something that you are maybe not aware of, but we with Tyrone we were also exploring some other options, and there are some interesting ways to promote long-term staking and also removing the penalties. So there are some ways to make it more interesting for people, and also governance could be a little bit modified. So we are looking into it, and early next year maybe we will be able to present it, maybe initially internally and then to the community. I think it's worth considering before sovereign layer deployment, or at least deploying it on the testnet and see how it works. Brianna is asking what's the incentive to stake if everyone holding SOV benefits in the same
Yeah, thank
fashion.
you. I was actually already answering that and then realized I was on mute. Thank you very much for the question, Brianna. It's a very good question and one which I want to clarify. Not everyone will be benefiting in the same way. Of course, people holding SOV will benefit from price accrual, but people who are staking will benefit directly from um, earning additional SOV. Now, one of the problems with staking in Bitocracy as it currently exists is that we have a multi-asset staking system, but we can even simplify it and look at it as a dual asset staking system. You stake SOV, which has its own set of volatility, and you earn BTC. That means that what you're trying to earn is BTC, and in order to earn that BTC, you need to take on a separate asset, SOV. And so you now have exposure to two different assets, and that dampens the demand for staking. Having the staking rewards provided in the same asset that you are staking means that you are no longer taking on what is effectively currency risk, and you can yourself denominate how much you are earning in BTC, but you can do so in a much simpler fashion. So, for example, were you to choose that you just wanted to convert immediately to BTC, you can do that. Um, but if you but you can do that while the asset that you are placing at risk is the same asset that you are earning. So it's very difficult to calculate how much you will earn today, right? Because you don't know how much BTC you're going to earn. And you don't know what the value of BTC to SOV is because they constantly are changing against each other. When you stake in SOV and earn SOV, and you know that you're going to earn 4%, you know that you're going to earn 4%. It smooths out the uncertainty that is related to staking and therefore makes staking a much easier proposition. Truki asks, was an ETA for Sovlayer discussed? Um, will Sovryn promote the Sovryn layer before launch? Will Boss have a snapshot? Um, okay, so I'll respond to each of these. We are effectively now in a position that we are basically ready to begin this process once this passes. So we don't have a date ETA, but the goal is ideally, if this does not prove to be an overly controversial SIP, the SIP will pass early next year, and we will immediately begin the process as it is mapped out in the SIP. In terms of Sovryn promoting Sovryn layer, yes, of course we will promote the Sovryn layer. And with regards to Boss having a snapshot, there is no need for Boss to have a snapshot. It will just begin to be distributed to the stakers, to the Sovryn stakers who will be staking on the Sovryn layer.
Iago, Brianna added some additional comment. So maybe you could also address where this SOV as a reward for stakers will come from. If it will come from a
Yeah,
portion.
so Brianna says, okay, I didn't realize that you'd be distributing the SOV from the buyback to stakers. No, it's not from the buyback to stakers. The goal with the buyback is to buyback and burn. So we would, on an ongoing basis, be reducing the amount of SOV. That is indicated in the forum post. And then Brianna says, I thought it was just being burned. Thank you, that solves my concerns. So I'm not sure if it does solve our concerns, but happy to take this conversation into the forum and we can discuss it there. Truki asks, okay, Truki says, all right, thanks, Iago, basically. And Dave8 says, in short, what do the stakers earn? In the new model, the stakers would stake SOV, earn SOV, and in the background, SOV would be burned via the revenues that the protocol earns across the various applications on the Sovryn layer. on other parts of the bus ecosystem dependent on what we deploy, and a new source of revenue would be the gas fees associated with the sovereign layer itself.
Iago, given that there is a limited supply of SOV and the rewards are supposed to be in SOV, no, it it will be sustainable until a certain period of time. Uh, I've on the forum I've proposed a little bit different approach, hybrid approach. So buy and burn using all the collected fees, but burn only like 80%, and that remaining 20% could be distributed as SOV to the stakers. I don't know if you saw this comment.
I would add there are nuances here that we will need to consider. So one is we need to make sure that a certain amount of revenue is distributed to the exchequer from the revenues on the sovereign layer. Something that we have not done within Rootstock, but we absolutely need to do for the sustainability of the system. And the second thing is that we need to should the at such point that exchequer will not have reserves of SOV that it can distribute. My view is we should introduce a constant inflation to SOV, which will be which means that the SOV will enter the market via stakers and exit the market via the buy and burn. Okay. We are coming to the end of the hour, and I think we are also coming to the end of the immediate questions that people would like to ask. I encourage all of you to please read the SIP. I think the SIP is quite comprehensive and provides a full roadmap of how we're going to get there. I think we can start quite soon, and I think this is very, very exciting. So I encourage everyone to read it. If there are things which need to be clarified or questions and considerations to debate, let's do that in the forum. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. I think this is probably the most important SIP we've ever considered. I think possibly the most exciting SIP we've ever considered. And I think this allows us to complete a mission that we set for ourselves uh, many years ago and that we've all been working towards ever since. So thank you, everyone, for joining. Thank you for your support, and stay sovereign. Oh, and of course, happy holidays to everyone and a happy new year.